Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us this day. Our session today is starting in another few minutes, just so that we do some housekeeping. I'm sure all mics are on mute. Yes. In case you have a question for our panelists today, please use the chat box. Also, do note that this session will be recorded and that the recordings will be shared with all participants after the sessions today. We would give another 2 minutes for just to allow for other participants to join us, and at 11:02 we would start fully. Okay, time check 11:02 at the dot on the dot. Welcome once again to yet another session that we're co-hosting, excuse me, as the Nigeria Network of NGOs with Sterling One Foundation and Giving.org. And our session today would be focusing on community development and community participatory strategies for sustainable or successful programming. Recall that communities are important to the success of any country or to any country's national development. That is why today we have brought two key prominent civil society actors, experts in their own right, and they have a very good experience that spans around education, community development, policy advocacy, and both our panelists today will be helping us to dissect this very important theme. We all work in communities, whether you're in Lagos, Abuja, Potiskum, or you're in Zamfara, or you're in Katsina. We all do some work in communities. And the purpose of why we have also founded ourselves as NGOs is for us to be able to develop various communities of beneficiaries that we work with. So today I have the pleasure of having joining us Mr. Victor Akubo and also Mr. Tunde Haremu. Like I've said, both of them are experts in their own right. Mr. Victor Akubo has 20 years experience in the development sector. He is the deputy director at Accord for Development, where he leads social investment initiatives and has also worked in the Niger Delta region. So you begin to see how this experience or his experience would help us today in being able to come up with community development strategies for success, so for a successful programming. Also, I have Mr. Tude Aremu, who is also joining us. He is an advocacy specialist, a public policy analyst. At the moment, he works with Plan International as a manager, policy research, and influencing. He's a researcher and a trained theater artist. Plus, also, he sits on the board of several civil society and non-profit organizations across the country and also world over. So you see that today, and this is just the abridged CVs. So you see that today we're in for a lot of learning, and as we're about starting this, Madam Peju Ibekwe, the Sterling One Foundation's chief executive officer, was saying she's looking forward to the presentations that we would have from both speakers today, and I'm also excited and looking forward to that. As I was preparing for this, I remember, wanting to speak at an event, and a Gen Z, when she was about to introduce him, he said, "I am an ancestor." So when you look at the participants that we have today, they are the ancestors of ancestors and the God of ancestors. So be ready. Please take your pen and paper, and also be ready to take as many notes as possible as we dive into the conversations today. Again, don't forget that the sessions will be recorded, and that we would also share all of the recordings with you after the sessions. For us to manage the questions that may come up as a result of their presentations, we would ask that you please send your questions via the chat box, and the host will collate all of this for our panelists to answer them, as it were. Let me now turn over to Mrs. Olakweju Ibekwe of Sterling One Foundation, the CEO, to please welcome us, and we'll take you now, Madam Peju Ibekwe.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you're joining us from across the globe. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I must sincerely appreciate our partner, our multi-year partner, the Nigerian Network of NGOs, for their partnership on this NGO development series. I must also sincerely appreciate our excellent speakers. I don't want to use the word ancestors, but then thank you so much for joining us today. Um, Today, we will be having a double session, and I promise it's going to be very insightful. Like Mr. UBC mentioned, I am definitely looking forward to it. Before we go into it, these are a few welcome notes from us at Sterling One Foundation. It is our privilege and our pleasure to co-host this NGO development series, which we hold quarterly in partnership with the Nigerian Network of NGOs and Giving.ng. We prioritize capacity building for the nonprofit ecosystem across the continent, and we started this session since 2021. If you want to benefit from our past sessions, please just go on our YouTube page, and you will have a lot to learn from the expert facilitators that have shared knowledge on this series since inception. Today, we're going to be looking at two themes, and they are community development and community participatory strategies for successful programming, and how to influence government policy through ethical lobbying. Um, it's definitely going to be an insight-packed session. Before we go into it, for those that are joining us for the first time, here's a bit about Sterling One Foundation. Sterling One Foundation is a registered not-for-profit organization. We've been around since 2018. We were registered by Sterling Bank, a financial institution in Nigeria, but we have a separate board of trustees that manage our operations and guide our strategy. Our vision is to be the benchmark of social impact in Nigeria by creating sustainable solutions for youth empowerment and job creation via impactful sectors. And we seek to tackle the root causes of poverty. Our ecosystem solutions include Giving.ng, which is Africa's first and only free crowdfunding platform, which also gives finishing grants to projects that are crowdfunded on it too. Crowdfunding on Giving.ng is as easy as ABC. You just go on the website Giving.ng, Giving meaning Giving.ng, to create your profile. You can start your campaign as an individual, or you register as a not-for-profit organization, go through the normal due diligence processes, and once that is done, you can start crowdfunding your campaign. Where you qualify, you can get up to ₦1 million in grants for your social impact initiatives. How to qualify and all that, you can find all that information on the website. In partnership with the Nigerian Network of NGOs, we've also established the first free-to-use account for not-for-profit organizations in Nigeria and arguably, yes, also in Africa. Once you use this account as a not-for-profit organization, you will never ever have to pay any form of charges. If anything, maybe SMS charges for telcos, and that doesn't go to the financial institution. This is a solution aimed at supporting not-for-profit organizations in Nigeria. And based on conversations with Mr. ABC, it's actually something that other financial institutions in other parts of the continent of Africa are also looking to emulate to support the non-profit ecosystem because yes, non-profit organizations, you're doing fantastic work and you need all the support possible. We also co-convened the Africa Social Impact Summit with the United Nations in Nigeria. The last one held July 25 to 26, and we are still getting positive feedback on the impact. I know the last year's own, over 40% of the non-profit organizations and various organizations that joined us got partnerships, funding, technical support just because they were part of the Africa Social Impact Summit. So you do not want to miss the next one, tentatively looking to hold in April 2025. And the communique for the one that happened in July, you can find on the impactsummit.org. On that note, I would like to say thank you again for joining us. I would request that we do not just participate in these sessions, but take the learnings and apply them to our various organizations because our desire is to ensure that we support the building of world-class organizations from Nigeria and the African continent. Thank you so much for your time. I hand over back to Mr. Oyebisi.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Ibekwe, and also for welcoming us, including highlighting the very good work that you do at Sterling One Foundation, plus also adding to that the non-profit banking product that we're so proud of that you have given to us through Sterling Bank. Now we'll get into the full session and we'll be starting with Mr. Victor Akubo. Recall that I had mentioned that he has 20 years experience in the development sector. He is a deputy director at Accord for Development, where he leads on social investment while also, working with multilaterals and also government, different partners. He's also had some very good experience working in the Niger Delta region as well. Don't forget, this is just an abridged version of his very robust experience in the development sector. Over to you, sir, and you have our attention for the next 25 minutes.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Oyebisi. Our ancestor in the development world. It's a pleasure meeting you on this platform. And also, Madam Olakwiju, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Like we've been told, we're looking at community development and community participatory strategies for sustaining or successful programming. There's a whole lot to talk about in community development, but we don't have all the time, so we're just going to look at some of the topics. We'll look at what a community is in this presentation. We'll look at basic principles of community development programming. And then we'll also see why community development process is important. And then we'll look at the processes. In the processes, we'll also look at the strategies. As we look at the processes, we look at various strategies that we can use. And then in spite of all this, there are obstacles. So we are going to be looking at obstacles in community development programming. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, when you, while I was preparing this, I discussed with my colleague and I was saying I want to see what is community development. And, because we work in the sector and we are used to it, and people begin to wonder, is there anybody who doesn't know what community development is? So what we're actually looking at is sharing our experiences as it relates to community development and what we think community development is. Community development is actually a derived word from community and development, clearly. So I will say, what's a community? We define community as a physical place, but they also can be defined as people who live in the same location, share common interests, jointly own or participate in something and share common characteristics or have common relations. We've been used to looking at community development as a physical, as a community as a physical place. But what is emerging now is community can also be defined as a relationship. That's why we say, but it also can be defined as people living in the same location or sharing common interests. So while you describe community by a location to say, okay, we are in maybe Transhamadi, that's a location. But you can also define community by relationship to say, okay, shoe sellers in Alaba market. So when we talk about community as community development practitioners, we look at it from these two directions. And then we go to development. We say it relates to realizing potential, growth, and expansion of something, and making something more effective. Of course, that's looking at the theory of change, and of course, which has to be something that is effective. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. And then when we put the two together, community development, we now say is a process where community members are supported by agencies to identify and take collective action on issues which are important to them. That's how some people see community development. They see it as a process where development agencies like us get involved in the process, help the people to identify and take collective action on issues which are important to them. That's one way you can see community development. You can also see it as an outcome. Now, most times, community stakeholders see community development as an outcome. They don't see the process, they see the outcome. If you are, you want to build a school, and you are engaging them to build the school, as at that point, they are not seeing any community development action, or they don't see it as a process. What they actually identify as community development is an outcome from that process for managing community change. Another definition also, which is more comprehensive, can say is a process for managing community change that involves citizens in a dialogue. That's one of the shortcomings in the community development work, in my experience. A lot of people don't dialogue with the community, except professionals like us are brought into the process, and then we sit down to dialogue on issues, to decide what must be done, to share their vision of the future, and then to involve them in the implementation of activities. That's also a shortfall from what has been going on over the years with our professionals. They are not involved in the implementation. Now, holistically, we can say community development, therefore, is a process of social action in which the people of a community organize themselves. Now, we're not talking just of, about professionals coming to organize them. We're looking at a social action in which they organize themselves for planning and actions. They sit down together and say, okay, this is what we need. How do we get to this point? What do we have to contribute to get to this point? They define their common and individual needs and solve their problems. I like this definition more of community development. It's about the people. They define their common and individual needs and solve their problems. Execute the plans with a maximum reliance upon community resources. Now, in times past, development agencies will go to the community, carry out development activities, and then leave. They don't ask most of these communities to contribute. But in the emerging trends now, communities are expected to contribute for the development. They may contribute manpower, they may contribute physical resources like land, and their time. This definition also states that they also supplement these resources when necessary with services and materials from government and non-governmental agencies. What it means is that the action of government and non-governmental agencies is supplementary to what they are bringing on the table. That's these agencies that are outside the community, and to help people to develop economically and social, excuse me, socially viable communities, which can assist, strengthen, and adequately support individual and family growth and quality of life. So community development is encompassing all the aspects of life in the community. And it starts with them, get support from professionals and government to improve their well-being. Now we look at principles. There are so many principles. Principles are just ethics, how we work. Since we are professional people, and we are the ones who are going to help the community, there are principles that will, guide us in the field. First is the community participation. Like I said in the last definition, the community has to participate. Whatever you do, community has to be there to participate. They have to support in the implementation. Now, we've had issues across the Niger Delta where I work of communities not participating in development projects. And what you get is that most of the projects are not sustainable. You go to the communities and the communities just feel that, oh, they came and they did this for us. That's not what we need. Or they came and did this for us, they have to maintain it. So that's why the principle of community participation is very, very important. If they participate in what you are doing, at the end of the day, you find out that you are carrying out more sustainable development initiatives. Ownership and involvement is key. Like with participation, once they participate, they own and they become involved in the project. So on the long run, it becomes their project and not the project of the agency. We have projects like that that NDDC constructed in the Niger Delta. They needed water. NDDC came, built very gigantic water projects. That's good. But in a survey that was carried out 3-4 years back, 80% of those water projects are not working, if not 90. 80% of them are not functional. That's because the people don't own it and they are not involved in the implementation. So ownership and involvement of community folks is very, very important in carrying out community development program. Empowerment is when you give people the power to be part of a process. Once you give them the power to decide what they want to carry out. Once you make them understand their rights in the development process, you have empowered them. And that helps them be part of the process. And when people are empowered, the simple truth of it is that they share their powers and use them for the betterment of the community. The next is equal access and opportunities. There's a lot of divide in the community when it comes to wealth. You find some people who are in the community, but because they feel they don't have the right, or they are not in the caliber of people to talk, they just keep quiet. You even find out that sometimes in community development work, some communities don't want to involve women. But as a principle, as a community development practitioner, you enforce or initiate equal access and opportunities for all development programs so that everybody is carried along, everybody has a voice. And now, because in some issues where in areas where you don't have this equal access and opportunities, you have people who we call benefit captors. They take over the process. They come out as if they speak for the community, but what they are telling you is actually what will benefit them. And to actually, solve this issue of benefit captors and opportunities, benefit captors, you need to, involve the principle or the ethics of equal access and opportunities. The next is networking. Getting other stakeholders to come together to work is a principle that a development, practitioner should always put in mind. Now, when you even do a proposal these days to development agencies, they want to ask you how you have planned to partner and network with other people. Networking increases, what do I call it now? Access to resources, knowledge, technical knowledge, and all of that. So networking is a very good principle, or is a must principle when community development process is being carried out. The next principle is rethinking. What we mean by rethinking here is actually assessing and evaluating. It's a process that goes on with all development programs. You may be doing it the first time and not doing it right. So you need to check. How can you do it better? So rethinking is assessing and always evaluating what you have done. It's a very key principle. People insist. Sometimes when you write a proposal, they will even ask you how you intend to sustain what you are asking over time. And the way you can actually do that is actually when you evaluate and evaluate over and over again. The next is advocacy, which means people speaking up for policies that will support their development. Do they think that advocacy is going to be part of what my colleague is going to take after now? He's going to talk, I'm sure some of it, I've not seen his work, but I'm so sure some of it has some elements of advocacy. And then learning, which is the last one I have. There are many other principles that development practitioners can bring up. Why is the process important? Do we need to do community development? I work in the Niger Delta, and over the years, institutions, multinational companies are beginning to involve development NGOs like us to manage the development process. Why? Why is it important? Or why do you need to, be involved in development? One, it can lead to long-term change, especially if new community values are embraced. We are used to certain values in the communities that sometimes hinders our development. And once you are able to bring in new thoughts and they embrace it, you discover that it will lead to long-term change. Now, people want to listen to community leaders for everything before now. But when development practitioners come in and say, look, everybody must be involved. In some communities, those are new values. In some communities, women are relegated. I've been to communities where they say women should not attend the meetings in the hall. And they say it's our tradition. And when we come in, we say, no, if that's your tradition, then let's have the meeting outside the hall so that the women can be part of it. At the end of it, you discover that what you come up with are things, are project initiatives that will lead to long-term change. Let me give an example of a market we built somewhere in one of the communities. The men had a discussion with us and they wanted us to do lock-up shops for the European Union. It was a European Union funded program. And when we went there, the European Union executive said, let's discuss with the women instead of the men. And when we had an engagement with the women didn't like the lock-up shops. They prefer open market stores. Well, and then the agency said, let's do open market stores. That market has been going on, it's functional for over 15 years now. I wonder what would have happened if we had done the lock-up stores. Another importance of community development process is that it meets the needs of the communities. NDDC felt that the communities needed water. They implemented a whole lot of water projects that are not sustainable. Even though those water projects have been provided, they are not functional, so they don't meet the needs of the community. If they had had a discussion, a community development process where the community had told them the scope, the kind of water supply that they need, maybe it would have been different. So when you do community needs, carry out community development process, you're actually trying to identify the needs of the communities and how to meet those needs. Access to resources is also another importance of community development process. There are so many people ready, willing to assist communities. When I say this sometimes in my office, the people begin to laugh. Yes, if you prove your point well, you always get people who partner with you. It's not all about money. Sometimes it could be technical support. Sometimes it could be, in terms of skills development and all that. So when you do community development process, it actually improves access to resources. It can give you some of the things you need for the development of those communities. And that's next is building of local leadership. We have discovered in the Niger Delta that the community development process that some of the oil companies that we work with came up with have built a lot of trainings and capacity program was involved in it. And then most of these leaders in the communities have built their capacity so that they are even, becoming leaders even in governance, in government, in their local governments, even in the state. So when community development process is properly done and capacity building is integrated, community leaders capacities are also built to the extent that they can, help and improve the communities. We also think that community development process brings diverse groups. We talked about the principle of partnership. It brings diverse groups and can foster alliance across groups. Now, communities, whether we like it or not, sometimes are divided into factions. And community leaders will always ignore the factions that are not supporting them. And then when you do community development and you identify those factions that are not supporting the main group, you bring them together to discuss. And then when they discuss, they embrace the project. If they don't discuss, if they don't come together, you discover that people go to the project, vandalize the project, and then sometimes don't even use it. So proper community development process actually brings diverse groups and can foster alliances across these groups. It provides a sense of inclusion. We said in the principle that the communities need to be involved. Now, once you bring them together, discuss with them, and they are the ones deciding, they are empowered to decide what they want and how it should be done. If somebody else comes to that community, you hear them say our project. But once they are not part of it, they are not included. and somebody comes and says, who's the owner of this project? They say it's NDDC. What's wrong with the project? We don't know. But once they are part of it, if they are included, it makes them feel that this project is ours. So ownership is entrenched. If the project is not functional, they look at it, they want to find out what is wrong with it. How can we get involved with it? How can we solve the problem? So good community development process actually provide a sense of inclusion for stakeholders. There are many, many more, but we'll just stop at that. Now I'll be looking at community development process in steps. The steps are not cast in stone. People can decide to handle it the way they should, but some of these steps need to be involved in before you can say you are really doing a good community development work. Now, first, we said defining the professional's role. What are you supposed to do? You as a community development practitioner needs to understand what your roles are. Why are you going to the community? Because when you get to the community have a lot of issues, and at a point you may not be able to handle all of that. Now we looked at the community professional's role in terms of facilitative. That's concerned with stimulating and supporting community development, acting as a catalyst for action and helping the process. Now, when you facilitate, you only bring the people together and ensure that they get the right information concerning what they need to do, but you still allow them to be the ones to decide. You are a catalyst. You like when some companies involved us to go to communities and carry out needs assessment. We didn't just go there and start telling them what they need. We identify, we bring up criteria for them to assess what is better. And then sometimes you find community stakeholders coming up with very, I don't know how to put it, very frivolous needs, and then it's your part as a community development facilitator to ensure that they identify what is a need and what is a want. So you facilitate. Basically, that's what I'm trying to explain. Sometimes it's educational. You take a more active role in agenda setting, having a positive and directive input as a result of his or her knowledge, skills, and experience. You guide them. You teach them. That's what we mean by education. You educate them on, the best practices and how, they should go with it. You also can be your role can be representational. You may be representing a stakeholder. The person funding the project is not there. You may be the person they see. Like when we go to communities for development or maybe donors, we are representing the donors there, all for the benefit of the communities. And then technical, which is very key. Application of technical skills to aid the community development process, skill sharing, seek to involve other people in technical process as much as possible. Here's step 2. Next slide, please. Okay, step 2, we said researching the community. Basically, with this, we are talking about baseline and information gathering. A lot of NGOs, development practitioners, hit the field without baseline. And you find out at the end of the program implementation, you find it difficult to evaluate what you have done. Baseline is actually not direct involvement with the community. You can go to the community, but at this point, you you'll be looking at a lot of literature reviews, and talking to people about some people and all that, external stakeholders and internal stakeholders as well. Now, why do you gather information at this level? You need to have context for what is going on in the community. Before you hit any community, you need to know what is going on in the community. You need to know some people and their histories. The history of this community gives credibility. You need to understand what their culture is, how certain things are done, and what is forbidden, and things like that. Also, for purpose of versatility, that's knowing the community, key stakeholders, and influences. Influences gives flexibility in who you approach and how you work. Now, sometimes when you go to a community and you meet certain people, and we call them benefit captures, they may just want to, for their own benefit, give you information that is not right. And when you work with just this information, you discover at the end of the day you are working with the wrong set of either tools or assumptions. So versatility is knowing the key stakeholders and influences that they have. Accountability is, being able to account for what you do. If you are writing a proposal to say these people, they don't have water, or these people, the level of education is low, you need to get this data and information at the community research, the step 2 of researching the community, so that you, on your own as a development practitioner, can account for the information that you have, that you are using to work with the community. Sorry, I don't know, it's raining here, so my speaker may be a little bit noisy. Still looking at processes of community development, you now look at entering the community. You have details, you have some information or data already, and you now go into the community proper. Now in the Niger Delta here, we sometimes say we are doing advocacy visits, not advocacy in terms of advocacy, because as at this point we are going into the community to see, to get the support of the community leadership, support of the stakeholder groups, support of opinion leaders. So you enter the community. Now, they see a community development worker in 2 dimensions, internal and external. Most times, as development practitioners, we are external to the community, most times. But how we try to do is that we get people we call local facilitators who work with us as internal community workers. It helps us to get more close to the people. It helps us to work better with the people. It helps the people to actually, to gain their commitment in the process. So it's not compulsory that you must be an internal worker when you go to the community, but you can also have people who work with you. You train them and they work with you as an external worker coming from outside of the community. Yeah. Step 4 is what we call consciousness rising, or raising, sorry. Now, after you go into the community, you need to engage the people to understand what you are there for, how it will benefit them, and what cooperation you will need from them. We say it raises levels of consciousness to allow people the opportunity to explore their own situations and the oppressive structures and discourses that frame their lives in such a way that they can act to bring about change. At this level of consciousness, what we do sometimes is we use community forums. Sometimes we even go to the media, we talk about what we want to do, and then the people are aware and they come together. It's a session where we go, we carry out engagements with the community. So, and at this point, you get to know whether they are committed to the process or not, or you get to make them committed to the process. So what are the approaches we use to raise the consciousness of issues? Environmental, social justice, power, social inequality with a community. The approach varies. Whatever approach you think, that's why the initial stage where you enter the community is important. At that point, you identify what kind of approach you are going to use. If you need to have a community forum and involve everybody, you do that. If they don't come together in a hall and you cannot have a community forum, you move ahead and do something else that will help you. In step 5, I said, at this point, you now do the needs and assets assessment. Now, for every engagement, it is important that a needs assessment is done for every engagement. Now, when I say this, sometimes people begin to wonder, do you have the resources to always do needs assessment? In some communities, there are needs assessment documents that have been done by, previous development experts that have visited the community before you. Lay hands on those documents and use them. A needs assessment is actually, allowing the people, or is a way of gauging their opinions, their assumptions, needs, and key issues or assets within a defined community. You use various tools. Sometimes we use what is called the participatory rural appraisal tools, and all of that. Sometimes rapid assessment tools. But what you need to do most times is to have a focus group interviews or discussion. When you say focus group, you are talking about meeting with various stakeholders, according to their groups. Most times we encourage, especially when you are doing this assessment, you meet the men, you meet the women, you meet the youth, and have discussions according to their focus groups. Then public issues forum is the same thing as what I've talked about when I talked about town hall sessions. You carry out town hall sessions, or meet everybody in the community together and have a discussion. Secondary data analysis is getting information that other people have already developed or prepared about the community. You can get that from literatures and or written text. Even in the community, you ask them for some text that have been written about their community. They give that to you, and then you analyze it. You also use community survey questionnaires. You either administer or you discuss with them and allow them to fill it and return it back to you. But most times, when you are dealing with the non-enlightened community stakeholders, it's preferable that you administer the questionnaires yourself. And then you also have interviews, interviews with the community leaders, interviews with the group leaders, and then there's another group of people that you need to interview. We call them opinion leaders in the Niger Delta. They are not leaders in the group. They are not community leaders, but their opinions matter so much in everything that happens in the community. You interview those sects of people, and then we call them opinion leaders. So the tools that you can use are there are numerous tools that you can use to actually get what you want. And then step 6, is at the setting goals and strategizing them level. At this point, some of us in the development, what we want to say, we are doing a business plan or strategic plan or implementation plan. After you do that needs assessment, you now do a plan. A plan gives you the broad direction for closing the gaps in the community and where you are now and where you want to be. Because you have done a baseline, you know where they are. And then where do you want to be? A plan will also give you directions where you want to take. What do you want to do? And how do you want to do it? And it also tells you, your plan will also tell you about your specific actions that you need to carry. Resources and capacity issues will also be discussed at this point. And then what success will look like and how to tell when you have been successful. Next slide. I'll run through it because of time. Next slide, please. Can I go to the next slide? Step 7. Step 7, of course, is the taking action. After you have planned, you have already drawn out a plan of what you want to do. You now take action. When you take action, be responsive and flexible. Most times you say, because it's not in the plan, we don't do it as a no. You are free to modify your plan. That's why you are always discussing with community people on what to do. Supposing you plan to train 20 undergraduates in a community, and your resources is not enough to do that. You can say, okay, let's do 10. Next slide. Which is the next is step 8, of course, which is evaluation. Next slide, please. At the evaluation stage, you now assess what you have done. Are you getting the results which you have planned to get? What do you do differently? Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. Next slide. Like I said, it's the evaluation stage. In evaluation, you need to explore 4 basic questions. What worked and why did it work? What did not work and why? What could have been done differently? And what adjustment and changes are required now? Remember, we talked about it as the principle of rethinking. You need to always look at what you have done. Next slide, because of time. Which is the last, number 8 is the last process. You evaluate and then you move forward. Now I'm going to be talking about community development obstacles. In as much as you have carried out all the due processes of development, you have looked at the ethics that you need to work with and all that, you have engaged the community, you will still have obstacles. I will just look at the obstacles, which is the last thing I have in the presentation. The lack of resources. Resources are not always available. So sometimes you try to define your scope according to your resource. Most times in the Niger Delta, there are a whole lot of plans going on, flying everywhere, NDDC plan, Shell has a plan, the community development plan and all that. But then there are issues of resource availability. Communities often struggle to secure grants or investment. That's a major problem in the development sector. Inadequate infrastructure. Of course, sometimes there are things you may want to do in certain communities, but because of the inadequacy of infrastructure like port transportation, utilities and communication systems, you can limit how much you can work in those communities. We were in a meeting in one of the communities, and I don't know wanted us to live stream what we were doing. And because in the community no network, we couldn't do that. They found it very funny. Say, how can you not have network in a place? I say, well, this is Africa. It's not everywhere that you have network. It makes development work harder. Social inequality, we have talked about it a little bit. Now, it's not everybody that is rich. It's not everybody that's educated in the community. And then when you want to discuss, these disparities cause a lot of divisions within communities. You find out that they feel, oh, you are discussing with the rich people or you are discussing with the educated and they don't want to be part of it and things like that. It hinders a lot of development work in the communities. Next slide, please. Cultural barriers. I talked about a community where they said women don't attend meetings in the hall with them. And our donor, the donor who supported us wanted to see women participate in the process. And it was an issue until we now insisted that we now have to do the meeting outside of their hall. Even then, it made some people feel like, oh, you have disrespect for our culture, you know. But in fact, development have gone, across that. But we are still trying to see how we can make, community stakeholders understand some of these things. Political challenges, of course, is clear. Most times when you go to the community, they want to know if you are APC or PDP member, and they bring up all sorts of criteria for which they want to work with you. Corruption is very, very high. Their leadership is unstable. Sometimes you are working today in a community, you come back tomorrow, the leader is no more there. The community leader you know has been changed, another leader is there and all that. So that hinders how much you can, how much work you can do in some communities. Sometimes the local government won't even want to work. They wouldn't want you to access the local government because they feel you are working with somebody who is not a support of their party and things like that. And then next is the community engagement. Sometimes we don't do enough community engagement. And once you don't do that, you are going to have issues. It can hinder the effectiveness of the development projects you want to bring in. Some of the people who want you to engage with them are may not necessarily be supporting the leadership of the community, but you still have to engage them. Let me round up. I think I have a prompt to round up. And then environmental issues, of course. We built a police station in one of the communities, and when flood came a few years back, the police station went down. That's clearly a hindrance for us, and a community where security is an issue. Next slide. Economic factors. Economic downturns or lack of job opportunities can reduce community investment and participation in development initiatives. In the Niger Delta now, you have a lot of people crying about employment. And so when we go there, what they want to hear is employment and not development. Regulatory and legal barriers. You know, government is beginning to come up with policies that support development of communities. An example is the Petroleum Industry Act. It created room for communities to have benefits from the oil companies. But there are still issues with that act which still needs to be addressed, which is somehow is a barrier. You know, until that is done, you still have those kind of legal barriers coming in. Sustainability concerns is ensuring that community development initiatives are sustainable over long term. And that can be very challenging, particularly in rapidly changing socio-economic environments. Sustainability is a very big issue internationally, and then more of it locally, where people still think that government owes them a lot. Oil companies that are working in their community owes them a lot. So sustainability is an issue when you carry out development activities, and it can be an obstacle. Next slide. Okay, in conclusion, I want to say community dynamics vary. Different community, different dynamics. So the strategy and process for community development engagement will depend on the community dynamics and on the community where you work. So there is no best fit strategy that you can use in any community. So when you go to the community, as you work, you develop the strategy that actually work with you. And then lastly, addressing these obstacles that we have identified often requires a multi-faceted approach that involves collaboration among community members, local government, non-profits, and other stakeholders. Thank you very much. I think that's last. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Victor Ikubo. I really enjoyed that presentation, and our time has been well spent. But again, we've also lost some time. But thank you for helping us to appreciate the importance of community development. And thank you for emphasizing that it's a process of social action. So we'll now move to the next speaker on our session today. Recall that I had also mentioned that he is an advocacy specialist, a public policy analyst. He is currently the manager, policy research and influencer at Plan International, a trained researcher and trained theater artist, and he sits on the board of many civil society organizations. I was about to say Professor Tunde Aremu, you have our attention, but you have our attention, sir.
All right, thanks, Mr. Oyebisi. Maybe we should also introduce you as the Generalissimo of the NGOs community, NGO community in Nigeria. So it's still okay. It's noon here now in Nigeria, so good afternoon to all. So I will just speak quickly to the issue of public sector advocacy, but with specific attention to the issue of influencing government policy through ethical lobbying. And then doing this, what I will also do is, as indicated, I will focus more on public advocacy, especially lobbying, rather than the broad aspect of advocacy, which we know is broader than lobbying. And lobbying is quite essential because of the need for us to actually know how to relate more with government, how to get government to do things for us. But then it also has its pros and cons, which we also need to focus on and pay due attention to. So what is actually public sector advocacy? Because as I said, I'm not speaking broadly about the whole of advocacy now. So please, the next slide. When we talk about public sector advocacy, we are talking about how do we plead a cause, an idea, how do we engage in terms of policy, how do we deliberately influence those with directive power in governance? That's what interests us when we talk about public sector advocacy. And then how do we also deal with the issue of policy ambitions within government? How do we impact on it? And what are the pros and cons of getting decision makers? And not just that, even the processes, how do we influence the processes of decision making? How do we influence practices within government and public institutions? These are things that are of interest to us. So, and when you talk about public sector advocacy, just like the broader aspect of advocacy, it has such components as research, because we always talk about evidence-based advocacy. You also talk about policy development, because what you also see is influencing policy, enactment of policy, translation of policy into practices. So you have to develop policy or review policies when you are doing this. And then you also look at lobbying. How do you lobby, which is what we'll be coming to, and paying special attention to. Then there's public engagement part of it, which we also need to take the public along, especially the owners of the issues, because we also make mistakes at times when we do advocacy. We forget the owners of the issues. We start behaving like messiahs who have come to save the whole world. I think these are also some of the things that part of the component of public sector advocacy. Then we interface with different stakeholders. And then there's also the need for coalition building. And then sometimes, especially to also look at the issue of media interventions. These are critical elements in public sector advocacy. But as I said earlier on, we are not going to dwell on the broader aspects of public sector advocacy now. We are going to be specific on the issue of lobbying. So how do we influence government policies? through lobbying, which is a critical thing for us now. When you talk about lobbying, what are the options that you have, and why do you want to lobby? When you are lobbying, unlike broad advocacy, what you are doing is that you are narrowing down to specific needs and interests of specific groups. That's one critical thing. And then it's a specific form of advocacy that focuses on influencing either legislators or executives or government officials directly. That's what you do when you are lobbying. And it's sometimes, I will also come to this later, sometimes it involves getting the support or services of professional lobbies who represent organizations or interests. And these are also some of the peculiarities of lobbying. When you are lobbying, you meet with lawmakers, you provide research, information from researchers, you do draft legislation at times, and draft policies as well. And then you organize campaigns to influence specific policies and regulations. These are basic elements of lobbying. But unlike advocacy and campaigns, lobbying is often done quietly and a lot of time behind closed doors. These are some of the intricacies around lobbying, which makes it different. And then it's overwhelmingly a specialist or experts approach instead of multiple non-technical voices. Sorry, don't let us run and sinners. Let's quickly do. I know that we are running for time now, but I want us to actually have good grasp of what we mean by lobbying and why we do lobbying. And one critical thing, don't forget, I said earlier on that it has become an overwhelmingly specialist and experts field. Non-experts also lobby, and I will come back to that later. But in many countries across the world, it has become an experts field to the extent that we actually have registered lobbies in some countries, and there are over 1,000 of them across the world now who do that. It's a money spinner in some spaces. And then, but one reason why it's also a specialist area is that for lobbyists, unlike those who just do broad advocacy, who do everyday advocacy, they need to have a good grasp of the complexities of government policies and processes, which some of the time when you are doing your advocacy, you have to start looking for people who will support you on. And that's what lobbyists do. They have grasp of it, they study it, they understand it. And a lot of time they are lawyers, they are economists, they are PR practitioners, and sometimes they're also former employees of government or of some lawmakers. And I will come to the relevance of that too. So let's move to the next slide, please. When we talk about ethical lobbying, which is a critical area of interest to us, when we talk about ethical lobbying, what actually is ethical lobbying? What do we mean by ethical lobbying? Ethical lobbying is advocating for particular interests or policies transparently. What we also do is that we follow legal and ethical standards when you are doing it. For ethical lobbying, you have to do it transparently. You have to follow legal and ethical standards. And then you also have to prioritize honesty and integrity to ensure that all interactions with policymakers serve the goods of the public. Then one of the critical things about ethical lobbying is that you also have to avoid reaching compromises and then compromising the public good or interest. And then one thing is that for places where lobbying has become big business, there are also regulations that actually guide them. Unfortunately, we don't have that in Nigeria. An attempt was made in 2016 by Senator Dino Melaye to introduce a bill called the Act for the Regulation and Registration of Lobbyists in Nigeria, and for other matters connected therewith. That was the name of the bill. Unfortunately, that bill did not see the light of the day. It was actually, I think it didn't go beyond the second reading at the National Assembly, at the Senate then. But in spite of that, there are existing regulations and laws that lobbyists need to pay attention to in Nigeria. We have the Public Procurement Act, which regulates how public contracts are awarded. We have Code of Conduct Bureau Tribunal Acts. I guess many of us know what the Code of Conduct Code of Conduct and Bureau and Tribunal, what it does. And then we also have the existing anti-corruption law. We have the ICPC law. We have the what do I call it now? We have the EFCC law. So now, why do we do ethical lobbying? First of all, there's need to build trust, to make people feel, those who are doing lobby, to build trust between us and those who are engaging with, because that's why it's not an open, don't forget I said it's done behind the door a lot of time, and it has to be ethical to build trust, not with only lawmakers, not only with other government officials, but even the other parties who are involved. And I will also come with the challenges with lobbying. So it's not always ethical, and why we need to pay attention and be careful about how we go about it. But ethical lobbying enhances transparency and accountability, which is one of the things that is critical when we are doing lobbying. So please, the next slide. So how do we, when you are lobbying, you are influencing change. So what are the pathways to influencing and lobbying? Next slide, please. One of the critical things that one of the critical things about influencing and lobbying is that, first of all, you have to understand legislative and policy making processes. How are policies made? Who plays what role? What are their functions? What guides their responsibilities? Those are also some of, and what are the interests that also come into policy making and lawmaking? Those are also things that when you are influencing or you are lobbying, that you have to know. You have to have detailed knowledge of this. Then you need to know what you want. You need to identify your policy goals. You need to define very clear, achievable policy objectives. Then you need to do your research, because one of the things that mistakes you should never make when you're also stepping out to lobby is also not to have clear evidence, not to know why you need to do what, and why it is critical, why the options you're also putting at the table are the right options. You need to be able to provide justifications for them. So you need to research your issues thoroughly. And apart from that, you also have to estimate your realistic agreement zone, because lobbying is also about negotiation. It's also about making requests. It's also about trade at times. You make some trades, and then we also come back to that, how it is some kind of negotiation. So, and then critical things that you need to build relationship with policymakers. It's also critical that you build relationship with those policymakers, know who sits where, what their roles are, and their sphere of influence. Because one of the mistakes you also make as a lobbyist is just to talk to everybody without knowing what their sphere of influence is, what capacity they have for talking to people, for making changes. These are also critical things you need to be conscious of. Then you need to network, you need to build trust, which is also, and still, next slide, please, still on the pathways to influencing and lobbying. As I said here, that you need to network and build trust. So you need to build relationships and then get the listening here of different stakeholders. As I said earlier on, those who make decisions. Sorry, next slide, please. I don't know whether it's at my side that is slow. Okay, thanks. When you build our relationships and you get the listening here of your targets, you need to adapt to some of the arguments of those targets. You need to be able to use their own. Yes, you want to influence their thoughts. You want to lobby them to see reason with you, go along the line you are actually reasoning. One thing you also have to know is know the way they speak, know what interests them. Then reason with them, don't argue with them. And then build on their ideas. Sometimes don't go smoking hot. Don't go with the idea that you want to educate them that they don't know. You need to educate them. Yes, you put information at their disposal for them to reconsider earlier position or to align with your own views. But you don't go there with the mindset of going to educate them, which at times you makes you deal with people with condescension. These are also some of the critical things you need to pay attention to when you are lobbying. And then you need to articulate your issues in persuasive and confident manner. I said persuasive because it's also not about throwing it at them. It's not about getting to the trenches for a battle. Then the ethics and capacity also counts. Perception that those you are lobbying also have count. It matters. You know, there is this perception that everything is buyable. It's not everything that is buyable. Sometimes the perception they have about you, the impression they have about you is also very critical and is important. Then you have to be abreast with information flow through, you have to think of what information flow, what are researchers showing. You have to also keep informing them about new thinking, new thoughts around what you are also lobbying for. You have to be able to do policy analysis, review, and project alternatives at every time. So please, let's move to the next slide. What are those challenges that are also likely to come across when you talk about lobbying? There's what we call entrenched perception. You have to, of lobbying itself. A lot of people actually have the impression that lobbying is an underhanding. Don't also forget, it's also understandable. If you remember what I said earlier on, that lobbying is not something you do and you do it, you bring the mass of the people into. It's a limited number of people who are involved in lobbying. And then a lot of conversations when it comes to lobbying are taking place behind the doors. It's not in the open there. And because you're also dealing with a limited number of people, because of the power they have, because of the influence they wield. So because of that, there came what we call entrenched perception of lobbying, in which people have the impression that lobbying is an underhand deal, an unstreeting tactic. That's also one of the things you need to be conscious of. There's this give and take framing of lobbying in popular narratives. That's what people believe. And so because of that, it becomes something that immediately you mention lobbying. And that's why for some donor agencies, even as NGOs, when you are taking money from them, some of them actually tell you outrightly that you can't use their money for lobbying because of that perception. But over time, that impression is beginning to change, and they are beginning to provide what they do instead of saying outright no to using their resources for lobbying, is that they give you resources or they give you guidelines on how you can do lobbying. These are also some of the things that are beginning to take place now. Now, there's also the stakeholders' interest when it comes to lobbying. There is the there is still talking about entrenched perception. There's also entrenched positions. There are diverse stakeholders' interests and priorities. These are also some of the things that we also need to be conscious of when it comes to lobbying. I mean, these are the tricks that we also have to pay attention to in lobbying. Sometimes changes in government will also affect lobbying because there could be shift in political power, there could be a realignment of interests, even when there has not been any change in political power. You also need to be conscious of that. Those are the banana peas that you need to be conscious of when you are also doing lobbying. Then there is also the issue of power politics, which is also because you are dealing when you are lobbying, you are lobbying in decision-making spaces. So you also need to be conscious of that. And then there's also the issue of policy ownership. Who owns what? Who has interest in those policies? The same thing with legislation. Who has interest? Who have active interest? And I will come back later and give an example of one of the challenges that comes with lobbying and why there has been negative perception of lobbying too, because as we talk about ethical lobbying, we can also pretend that there has not been some form of unethical lobbying. We also have to be conscious of that. The issue of pressure from strong influences is there in this instance when you talk about the other side of ethical lobbying. There are also the issues of counter lobbying. And an example of that, for those who are familiar with the petroleum industry bill, the PIB bill, when it was, I mean, it was one of the longest bill at the National Assembly. I mean, it was, there are stakeholders, NGOs, different stakeholders who spearheaded the campaign for that bill. And at some point, a lot of lobbying had to come. But then there was also what you call unethical lobbying that was also going on behind the scene at that time, that everybody who was involved in that with the advocacy for that bill at that time were also conscious of. That is some part of the Nigerian oil sector were also at that time also lobbying to also alter some of the elements in that bill then. And it affected the time it come to the extent that the way I would describe it is that we had a convoluted route that came with a lot of obstructions, really, and then aggressive lobbying from agents of those of the multinationals then to make sure that the exact law that we wanted wasn't what we got. So the draft law then was meant to serve the purpose of fostering transparency and accountability in the oil sector. But that was thwarted severally by these companies that I'm talking about. It involves a lot of negotiations, discussions with lawmakers, which led to the addition of key provisions in that law, what we eventually got. So the PIB or PIA, Petroleum Industry Act that we got is actually different from what we had in mind when we were negotiating, when we were actually advocating for that law. These are some of the things we need to also be conscious of when it comes to lobbying. So just as we want ethical lobbying, there's also what we call unethical lobbying, which is also very there, which stares us in the face, which we can also not deny exists. So, we always have a lot of discourse and exertion of pressure in favor of corporate interests, especially when you are lobbying for particular policies and laws. And then, what are the ethical considerations that we need to have when we are doing public sector advocacy? There's the issue of transparency. we need to have communication grounded in informed data. That's why I mentioned the issue of research earlier on. There has to be full declaration of identity of lobbies and interests that are represented in the issues that we are raising. Then we need to create an environment of trust and credibility through transparent communication about what interests are there, who is interested in it, why they are interested in it. These are also very, and then there's also need to avoid revolving door practices. In some countries, there are actually laws against what is called revolving door practices. What is revolving door practices? For those who have been involved in advocacy, it's not unusual for you to have come across people who are being in government. People are being in government who have supported lobbying, who have supported advocacy efforts because of the knowledge they have about processes in government. Let me give a ready example of one that I was part of. I think some few years ago when we were lobbying and also advocating for anti-stigma law around HIV and AIDS at the National Assembly, we had to get the support of a former member of the National Assembly, who also happens to be a medical doctor and a well-known author and writer in the country, to actually support us then. And with the support, we were able to open doors. We were able to get more attention because then the issue of stigma around HIV and AIDS was not very understood by even lawmakers, to the extent that many of them did not understand the essence of the need or the urgency of the need for that legislation at that time. So we needed this person who could actually speak to them, who could get their hearing, who also understood the way they reason. That's why we also, so that could be a revolving door practice. But what we also did then was that we got this person to support us. But what we are saying is that why we say avoiding is that there are also ethical issues about it. In some countries, what they do insist on is that people must have stay out of government for a certain number of period, for a certain length of time before they can get involved in lobbying. That's what is called a revolving door approach. And then there is also what you also need to put at the forefront of the lobbying process is also public interest promotion. How do you strike harmonious equilibrium between advancing corporate interests and fostering greater public good? Some of the time when these lobbies are done, they are done for advancing corporate interests. But we also must at all time foster greater public, see how do we foster the greater public good at all time. Then there must also, as I've said earlier on, the issue of transparency and disclosure of relevant private interests and avoidance of conflict of interest. This is also critical for us. Then, lastly, please, let's go to the last slide. One of the critical things in lobbying that we should also be conscious of is the need for mobilizing from within. Either you are lobbying at the parliament or you are lobbying with the executive, or you are targeting the bureaucracy. It is important that it is also strategic. Yeah, you also look at possibility of insider lobbying. How do you do that? You need to build capacity of supporting members of parliament. And why am I also saying you need to build capacity of supporting members of parliament? I was involved in a research funded by members of funded by Westminster Institute during the 7th National Assembly. And one striking thing that came across was that almost 70% of members of the House of Rep that we spoke to didn't know anything about lobbying. You know, this negative perception of lobbying as under the table deal, underhand deals, those are the things that most people need. So we have to build their capacity, not just about the issues, but also the processes, the strategies, the ethics of lobbying. So it is possible, it is also critical that you build capacity of supporting members of parliament in lobbying, because you need them to be able to talk. It's not just about advancing arguments at the floor of the parliament that will get your issue addressed or you get your bills passed into law, but the negotiation that takes place away from the floor of the parliament. And if it's with the executive, who are you talking to? These are also some of the things that you need to also be mindful of. So you need to build the capacity of those who are also lobbyists, so that you also build lobbyists from inside. Then you have to provide them with relevant information. Yeah. Then mobilize from support from within bureaucracies, either within the parliament or within the civil service. Then you have to mobilize internal supporters who are familiar with the issues. There is also the tendency for us as CSOs at times to I don't know where it came from, to actually view civil servants as people who lack capacity. In the few years I've worked with people in the civil service, I've also discovered that quite a number of them, quite a large number of people there have high capacity, they are knowledgeable people. So we also have to leverage on them as lobbyists, leverage on their capacity, mobilize their support because of their familiarity with the issues. Then you have to build ethical knowledge, right awareness. For some of us in the civil society groups, we also talk about human rights-based approach. There's also the need for right consciousness amongst lobbyists, so that they also know that some of the time why we are also doing is also because people have rights to certain things that we are lobbying for. So it also helps us in advancing relevant arguments. So thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Tunde Aremo, for taking us through that very insightful session on ethical lobbying. And I'm glad that we've been able to marry the community development aspect of this session also with ethical lobbying. Because at the end of the day, when we're doing community development, there are some issues that we would see in the field or the field that needs policy review, as Mr. Akubo was telling us the other time, that some aspects of the Petroleum Industry Act needs to be reviewed. And for us to be able to review that, we could use some lessons that we've learned from ethical lobbying as delivered by Mr. Tunde Aremu. Now let's go into the Q&A. We will do this Q&A quickly. Don't forget that we mentioned that, for any questions that you may have, please type them out in the Q&A box so that we can pick those up. Colleagues at the technical side of this event can pick that up, and we can ask the panelists to please answer that. In case you have any question for either Mr. Victor Akubo or Mr. Tunde Aremu, please type them out now in the chat box, and we'll pick them up. Also, I'll need the support of the technical team, just in case I'm missing any question. I do not see any question at this time, but just in case I am missing any, maybe there's any in the chat box. Again, let's work together in doing that. Mr. Aremu, let me quickly ask that you please expatiate further on this aspect of the of ethical lobbying. I know you mentioned that some donors would not allow you to use their resources for lobbying, but you mentioned that this is changing. What changes are you seeing now? Because I do know, if I'm allowed to mention a donor, I do know that USAID will not allow you to do lobbying with its resources. In fact, there's an aspect of your reporting that asks you to mention whether you have lobbied or not. But I do also know that in the US, you can register as a nonprofit and also ask that you're allowed to lobby, then you're allowed to use 25% or thereabout of your funding for lobbying. While there is no law in Nigeria that says that, what realities are you saying, sir, Mr. Arem?
Okay, thanks a lot, Mr. ABC. Yes, you are correct about it. In reality, what's not just you said, a lot of donors from US actually make you sign, not just that they give you guidelines, they make you sign a commitment that you are not going to use the resources they are giving you for lobbying. And that's, as I said earlier on, that's coming from the perception that lobbying in most instances are unethical. And as I said, we're also not going to be pretentious about the fact that a lot of lobbying. I'll give you an example of unethical lobbying, what we experienced with the petroleum industry bill, why we have the type of petroleum industry act that we have now that is not as strong as we would have wanted it to be. But then I know that for the European Union now, there's actually a guideline on lobbying, which comes with some of the calls for proposal now on ethical lobbying. And they are very detailed in how to go about it. And that's why I said earlier on that there are guidelines which will also help you know what portals to actually avoid when you are conducting lobbying. But for the US agencies, I actually think that by and by, there's some bit of relaxation of the rule for some of the donor agencies coming out of the US. What some of them also do is that they set parameters for lobbying, and they also give guidelines of what you can give out as gift items, because it's also known that at times when you are consulting with people, you give gift items. There's a value placed on how much gift you can give. For instance, in some instances, you can't give a gift item that is above $10 or certain amount of money. These are also some of the things so that what you're also doing is that they are merely allowing you to live with whoever you've had conversation, with whoever you've had some contacts, some items, materials that probably you've branded that will make them remember that you are around, that you came around, but not something to buy them over. Not something that you are using as inducement. I don't know if that responds to the question.
Yes, thank you so much. That has provided some clarification. It's, I mean, from my sense is that this is an area that is tricky, but it's also a capacity that we all need for us to be able to get policies approved. Thank you so much, Mr. Remo, once again. I have this question for Mr. Kubo, and it's from Abdullahat Musa. It's saying, good day, everyone. The first presenter mentioned some obstacles in community development. Please, can we have ways of mitigating these obstacles? Mr. Kubo, do you want to give us some field experience on how you were able to mitigate some of those obstacles that you mentioned? I know you mentioned lack of resources, inadequate infrastructure, social inequality, cultural barrier, political change, amongst others. Mr. Kubo, do we still have you?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay,
All
sir.
right,
Please
thank
go
you
ahead.
very much. Yes, there are lots of obstacles that I mentioned. Sometimes they are out of your control as a development practitioner. When we talk of resources, how you can, try to solve that is actually trying to see how you can get partners who can get involved in your initiative. And then obstacles like lack of infrastructure is completely out of your control. You can only see how you can, manage that somehow. Like when port transportation is involved, what you can do is to get vehicles that can actually get you there, and communication systems and things like that. The issue of social inequality is actually more of awareness, and you can use the ethics of inclusiveness. Make sure people are carried along. We talked about empowerment. What it means is that you give people, make people understand their rights and make them feel that when they make their inputs in any process, it is taken. You can actually use that also to address some of the issues when it comes to community engagement, ensuring that everybody in the community is engaged. Sometimes, if community engagement is not properly done, don't be too fast. Still go back and do it. Maybe you may have some cost issues with that, but then ensure on your own that proper community engagement is done. And then we also talked about issues of economic factors. Those are somehow out of your control, but you can also initiate income generating issues, initiatives that can actually build the economic manpower of the people in the economy, in the community, sorry. Regulatory barrier is part of what the co-speaker has really told us about. Lobbying, which is a very good part. I really like that, and I've learned from it a lot from it. You when it comes to legal issues, all you can do is to lobby and engage. Like we talked about the PIA, we're already having meetings, having a lot of media broadcasts about the what we think was not okay with the PIA, with the bill on community development. But unfortunately, it was signed into law. But we are still discussing on how we can still see how those things can be carried. And then I think I also mentioned sustainability concerns. Well, the beginning is the success, the beginning of success for every project is when you actually address how you sustain it. So you can actually take measures, plan for sustainability from the beginning of it. If the project, if you see that it cannot be sustained, then it's better at that point not to go ahead. So, I mean, there are lots and lots of ways we can try to mitigate against some of the barriers. Some, of course, like I've said, is out of our control. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Akubo. And please don't forget that all the presentations will be shared with you via email after the session, including the recording as well. Mr. Remo, someone is asking that at the end of the day, what are the benefits of ethical lobbying in today's society? Let me mention that I'm acknowledging Christina Abandi's message to the Nigerian Network of NGOs. We'll pick this up as a sidebar. For Mr. Remu, question for Kende Akinteriwa: what are the benefits of ethical lobbying in today's society?
Okay, I'll make it that very brief. I understand why. I suspect that question is coming from the background of the fact that you look at the society we live in, it's assumed that everything is cash and carry. So why bother yourself about ethical lobbying? But then you also know that from what we said earlier on about ethical lobbying, when you take the ethical approach, there is the issue of transparency, which you also start building the culture of transparency, which, yes, it doesn't come overnight. It doesn't become entrenched overnight, that culture, but you start building towards it. Then there's also informed decision making, really, because you are trying to influence decision in certain directions. And when that decision is informed, the issue of commitment to it, the political will to also, for instance, we have laws that are being passed. And the challenge is that sometimes you also find some members of the executive also speaking for the law so that the parliament also align with it, and then they pass the law. But then after that, it becomes something on the shelf. If it's not informed decision, they won't own it afterwards. You've gotten what you want, fine, thank you, bye-bye. That's what they say. But the enforcement of law or implementation of policies will also be determined largely if decision is also informed. It's a well-informed decision. That's the essence of so it tied into this is the issue of accountability, then which eventually leads to earlier democratic processes. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. And added to as a follow-up to that, please quickly also help us address this question from Asana Kazim. How can lobbying be used to address social and environmental issues?
Well, one of the critical things when it comes to environmental, let me pick environmental out of the broader social issues, is by and by interests of donors and supporters of social advocacy, they keep shifting depending on what is prevalent and everything. And then sometimes lobbying within that circle is also important. It helps with sourcing resources for those campaigns, for those advocacy, for the demand for certain environmental work. I mean, that's very important. So it's consciously I'm interpreting that question as dealing with environmental issues, not just issues of broader environment now. Then the essence, how is also when you are using lobbying, you're also building coalitions. When I talk about coalitions now, I'm not talking about coalitions of CSOs. I'm not talking about coalitions we are very familiar with, but you are building coalitions of interests in different domains, be they businesses, be they in government, be they among policymakers, be they among policy implementers. That's what you also do when you also use lobbying at times. So those coalitions also become very strong. So it's not the usual coalition that talks every time. And sometimes people can turn on their TV, they listen for 5 minutes and move on to the next channel. But this time around, we are talking about coalitions around where decisions are making. Then yes, the essence of lobbying too is that when you are dealing with social issues, is that you are also advocating for legislation, but not just legislation, you are also advocating for enforcement. Let me give you an example. There's virtually all of the states of the country, except one, now has passed the VAP law. But then the VAP law actually makes provision for certain infrastructures, for certain services, for certain facilities, for certain supports. Where are they? The political will to actually put them in place is not there. The political will to also enforce that law is not there. So sometimes it goes beyond just broad advocacy now. You need to do some lobbying for some state governors to actually, when even they pass the budget, to call the relevant persons and say, go and release the fund. There is need for the catchbacking after the budget has been made. These are also some of the things that you need to do. That's why lobbying also becomes relevant, because they can pass law, yes. The budget itself is a law, it has been passed. But who's going, if there's no cash backing, if there's no cash release, it's null and void. You don't get results. That's also the essence of lobbying, really. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Let me quickly move to Mr. Victor at this time. And Innocent Effiong is asking, how do we deal with community gatekeeper or watchdogs who sees community support initiatives as government resources and create conflict of interest to disrupt the community project?
Okay.
Mr. Kuba, over to you.
Thank you very much for that. if I understand your question very well, you seem to be talking about some community gatekeepers who may want to capture the benefits of development initiatives, and as if it's a kick from government or something, and create conflict of interest.
Yes.
Yes. Basically, when we did, when I talked about the principles of development practice, we talked about ownership and involvement. Once this principle is entrenched in any process you are doing, it kind of water down on the influence of benefit captors. That's what we're talking about. In every community, there are benefit captors, not just gatekeepers. There are people who are, opinion leaders who may want to capture the benefits for themselves. But if this principle of ownership, where people are involved, discussions are held where people's opinion, and the initiative is properly, awareness is properly created about that initiative. I don't think it will be possible for some people to actually capture such benefits. Sometimes government projects are very good, but then the groundwork for implementation of government projects sometimes are not enough. So you now have people trying to, bring that up. And that's why development agencies like us are always available, to educate people, enlighten people, and get them involved in the process. I think all you can do is to actually educate the people, make them aware, and then get them involved. That's what I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Can I ask the SOF team to please start sending out the evaluation surveys, the survey for the session for us to, as we're trying to round up now. Please send the link out now so that colleagues can start dealing with that. Someone sent a message to us at the Nigeria Network of NGOs saying that they have paid and they've not been able to get their receipts. My colleague Oyinda Molash already sent a message directly to you. I'm just acknowledging that. Please check your the chat box on this meeting link so that we can pick that up. Let me take the last round of questions, and this would come to Mr. Victor. Then I'll ask Mr. Remu the final one as well. Okum Enemy is asking, please, sir, a situation where you consult and engage community stakeholders during needs assessment and they take active part during implementation, but fail to show commitment of ownership of a project when it involves little financial contribution to sustain it. What do you do?
Yeah, most times we try to shy away from asking community stakeholders to commit financially. It's difficult. It has never been easy for them to commit financially to any development process, no matter how important it is to them. So what we do is we try to gain their commitment through resources, other resources, like land. If you want to construct a project, you say, okay, your contribution has to be in terms of land. Sometimes labor. Community has available resources for labor. They can contribute. It may not be free, but it may be at subsidized rate. Sometimes also is commitment in terms of sustaining the project. They give you a commitment in writing to say, oh, we'll maintain this project. When this project is completed, we'll maintain it. It's really very difficult to get financial cash commitment for communities when you carry out development initiatives. I've experienced that several. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And Mr. Remo, the final question to you for the day is from Imran. How can governments ensure that lobbying serves the public interest rather than disproportionately benefiting wealthy and powerful groups?
Well, I have to confess to you that that's a tricky one. I won't pretend that there's a silver bullet for that. But what I will tell you is that, first of all, it actually starts with us, the people, not just government now, that we take active interest in what is taking place, who is doing what. Some of the time, the lobbying takes place, yes, lobbying takes place behind closed doors. But we also know those who are interested in what, and then public voices are also very critical. So that when there's an overwhelming public opinion on an issue, what the lobbyists are doing is to ensure that the relevant domains of power are listening and acceding to the requests of the mass of the people. So so that's where we also support what lobbyists are doing. The other aspect of it is also that there are existing laws. As I said, yes, the bill sponsored by Senator Dino Melaye in 2016 did not see the light of the day. But then, as I said earlier on, there are existing laws really that are also applicable, that even as citizens, we can also show interest in and call government attention to it where we hear, because interesting thing about lobbying is that as much as we say that it takes place behind the door and is targeted, is not flowing in several directions, is that what's go out, we know who is interested in what, just as a PIB bill. Guardian and Premium Times actually did extensive stories and made mention of some companies that are actually lobbying over the petroleum industry bill as it was then before it became an act of parliament. I mean, these are also some of the things. So we can actually call for the implementation of relevant laws. Some of them, as I said earlier, of Public Procurement Act of 2007, the Code of Conduct Bureau and Tribunal Act is there. There's the ICPC law, there's the EFCC law. There are different laws that are also applicable that we also need to ask for their implementation. And eventually, where we have a regulation actually giving directive to the operations of lobbies is also going to have its own impact. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Remo and Mr. Akubo, for such an enlightening session. Can I again ask the team at Sterling One Foundation to please share, deploy the evaluation link so that we can have, participants telling us what works, what did work, and how they want us to improve on the sessions. But in the last over 1 hour, 30 minutes, we've been hearing from Mr. Victor Akubo, Deputy Director at Accord for Development, and also Mr. Tunde Aremu, Manager, Policy Research and Influencing at Plan International. They've both shared from their wealth of experience on the theme of today's capacity building session around community development and community participatory strategies for successful programming. Yes, the evaluation link has been deployed thanks to the 140 participants that attended the session at some point, and now we're at 101 participants still with us as at 12:58 p.m. Nigerian time. But please ensure that you complete the evaluation form. The link has been shared so that we can use this to improve on the sessions. We've had about 3 or 4 of these sessions this year, and it's really been exciting working with colleagues and friends at Sterling One Foundation on this very important training. Quick takeaway, as the donor community is thinking around localization, which means that, they would now like to fund NGOs directly without, I like the word middlemen. It means that as nonprofits, we all have to keep our capacities on. And the 2 sessions that we have today would be very much helpful in getting ourselves ready for the full implementation of the localization agenda. Once again, note that we would send you the presentations and also the recordings from today's session. Someone is saying the form is not showing. Please try again. Check your internet to be sure that it's also moving well. Please don't forget to complete the evaluation. And let me thank Mr. Victor Akubo for his time and also Mr. Tunde Aremu for his time as well. We've really benefited from today's session. On that note, let me also thank all our colleagues from Sterling One Foundation and the Nigerian Network of NGOs for supporting at the background this session as well. And also to thank the leadership of Mrs. Kpeju Bekwe for doing this with us in the last 2-3 years. And we do hope that this continues as we also advance our work in the nonprofit sector. Thank you once again, and please do enjoy the rest of the afternoon and also the evening or the morning from wherever you are joining us from. Bye-bye, and please don't forget to complete the evaluation questions.